Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where I interview great leaders and try to extract their wisdom and experience for you to learn from and hopefully avoid making their mistakes. Check out practical-leadership.academy because you want to help your new managers succeed with hybrid or remote working. Shantanu Shekhar, thank you very much for joining me.
Delighted to be here, Paul. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to my wonderful audience?
Of course. So I'm Shantanu Shekhar, as you mentioned. I'm actually in the revenue operations space. And the reason I bring that up is there was a recent study, I think LinkedIn and CNBC did it together, that the fastest growing job in the US is actually head of revenue operations. So very excited to be in this, I would say almost nascent space, but really exploding. And I know you've been in this world for a long time, Paul. So I know that in parts of SaaS, this is now quite a crucial role. So yeah, very excited to be here. Um, I can go on and talk about revenue operations, but very high level. That's what I've been doing for the better part of a decade. I've been a management consultant in a past life. I'm sure that'll come into our conversation. And then on the personal side, I'm a father. I have a 4-year-old, and living in Ireland for the last 8 years, and very excited to be here.
Well, RevOps is the heart and soul of a good, well-functioning revenue organization. I mean, revenue operations together with sales engineers are, I think, the most effective levers for getting salespeople to do what you want. Because you can't really just ask a salesperson to do what you want. They're typically kind of prima donna-like, which is what they should be. You know, they're actors. Yes. It's a performance profession.
Absolutely.
However, they're not always the most data-driven types. And if they are, then finding somebody who's the most relationship-driven on the other side of that is quite hard. But if you've got the RevOps team and your sales engineers, you can point people at the right direction because you show what good can look like. You model that. The enablement happens. And they can see why good should look like that. What's in it for them. So you're modeling both the action, the practice, the performance, and the benefit. If you do this, and here's what you do, look how much money you can make.
Love it. And I love what you just said because, I have an acronym which I love, which is WIIFM. What's in it for me?
Totally.
And I think a big part of, and I think you just mentioned, obviously we talk about people being data driven or not being data driven and how you really tie that together. To me, a large part of my own role and folks in similar roles as mine is maybe 20% is actually getting the data, the insight, the story. 80%, as you said, is literally getting that change and getting the change to really embed across, which is all about communication. So love what you just said there.
And if you've got a 4-year-old, then you know all about communication.
Oh, absolutely. That's the tougher job. That's where change my stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I think I've had kids now for 11 years. My eldest daughter is 11. Right. And the difference in my communication abilities, the way that I've personally developed over the last decade and a bit, is immense because you have to really put yourself in the shoes of the other person. And it's not just who they are or their background, it's their level of comprehension. So if you're trying to talk to a 4-year-old, most salespeople, no, that's not true. That's not true. Because salespeople are busy. They're focused. They're determined. They're driving them towards something. Yes. You've only got a limited amount of headspace, so you've got to keep things super simple. It's one of the reasons why somebody like Donald Trump was such a powerful communicator, because he spoke in 10-year-old language. You know, that's the sort of thing.
Anyway. And know your audience. That's literally the number one rule of communication, right? Know your audience, tailor the message, and it works. It works for a 4-year-old as well as for, like you said, the most seasoned sales professional.
44-year-old. Shantanu, what was your journey to becoming a people manager?
Right. So I think the journey I'd start with, and I was very lucky actually, or fortunate, I would say, even in the early part of my career, I spent about 5 years at Bain & Company, which is the management consulting firm, and they are really focused on coaching and people management. And about a year and a half, I was a young, wet behind the ears associate consultant, but within about a year and a half in, I was already managing a couple of people. And now a lot of different companies have a supervisory role or where you're responsible for somebody's output, but not really managing them. I think what I loved about Bain was even for someone who's so new to role or so new to even working, you start really by managing people. You start caring about the professional development. You are responsible. You get upward feedback. So all of that started about a year and a half then. And I really believe in those 5 years, by the end of those 5 years, I was managing a couple of case teams where you had 7 people odd. And that entire focus on not just being given the opportunity to lead and manage and really manage people, but being given the tools on how to think about it and really learn that as a mix of art and science. I keep going back to sales. Like just like we say sales is a mix of art and science, I would say people management is definitely a mix of art and science. And that's how my journey began. And then since then I've pretty much been managing people all my professional career since then. For the better part of a decade, I've been in the tech space. I was at LinkedIn for a while. I'm now working at Gong, and even now I've been taking the learnings from my first few years and then adding on from different places. In LinkedIn, we had this phrase: every single employee deserves a great manager. So just how you
That's nice.
start building towards that. So yeah.
Every employee deserves a great manager. Writing that one down. Okay, interesting. What then did you pick up as you were developing in your own career? What
hmm
sort of advice would you then turn and give to somebody in that same position?
Got it. And this is the number one advice that has stuck with me across. Like I said, there's been a lot of things I've learned on the job. There are people who have, through osmosis, you pick up things that different people talk through. And obviously, there are reams and reams of training and sessions I've gone through. The one thing which has stuck to me the most, and this is early on when I was about a year or so in LinkedIn, um, and I'll actually name this. He now leads LinkedIn's EMEA and LATAM business for the B2B sales and talent solutions, Olivier Sabella. And he talked to me about how leadership and management are two very different things, and people often conflate the two.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm going there is leadership is all about, let's say, being inspirational, being motivating, think about being a thought leader and driving a lot of, I would say, a vision and mission for your team and so on. But as a manager, there's an element of having to roll up your sleeves and really drive process and accountability and really build a very, I would say, almost build a very clean way of connecting what's the bigger picture, what's the 30,000 feet view to what does this mean? Again, I go back to WIFM. What does this mean for me
Mm-hmm.
as someone working in your team? What should I be doing? How should I be thinking of? I can go into details, but more around what is my week going to look like, my month going to look like, my quarter looking like. So building that mechanism, the science part of it, which goes with that art or vision that you're going from leadership. That difference is massive, and I think my advice to anyone who's new to management is making sure you're able to define what your mechanism of being a manager looks like and how would you operate day in and day out. How would you give that clarity to your team?
So basically, know what your role is. Know why are you there. What are you adding to that team that they wouldn't otherwise get?
And that's fair, exactly. And there's I think there's value add, like you rightly said. A large part of, and again, because I started off in management consulting where a successful people manager was also adding a lot of value to the actual output. And again, in consulting, the output was worth millions of dollars quite often in terms of slides. So there's like, okay, how are you thinking about, is are you answering the right questions or not? And it's adding value and making the finished product look better. In sales, when you come out, it's obviously how are you showing up in front of customers. There's value add there, and that's what I would call almost on the thought leadership side. To me, and it goes back to the 20% output, 80% communication. To me, there's a massive element in being a successful manager and driving process leadership. And process leadership is, okay, have you thought about what your overarching goals are. How do you work backwards from there? What are your and I don't want to use an acronym for the sake of it, but what are your SMART goals for the week? What are your OKRs for the quarter? What are you doing in the month? What does that mean in terms of the anatomy of what a week in your role looks like? So literally driving that together, especially for people who are new in role coming into your team, but also for people who've done it in a certain way in a certain company, it might not translate into your role. So building that process and predictability and defining what it means, and then helping them navigate through how to communicate that across the org is crucial.
The difference between leadership and management. Yes, very much. There's a great definition from a chap called Joe Owen, who was one of my guests a while ago. He's a great leadership management writer. And he says leadership's about getting people to where they would not get on their own.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That is a good one.
The other ones that I'm sure you've heard of as well. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with the SMART stuff or the OKR stuff. I mean, the simple things are brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, the magics, the basics are magic too. That's the whole point. If you need to do the basic things, you need to do them really, really well. And if you want to learn how to do them really well, come along to my masterclass and my course, and you'll find out more. Anyway, that's my advice.
Love it.
Yeah, because I do courses, coaching for new managers.
And I'm sure
the other thing I'm sure people have heard is that the idea is leaders do the right thing and managers do things right. You know, so you're leading people towards the bright sunlit uplands, but you're managing them to get things done.
Yes.
There's a chap coming on as a guest fairly soon, Garen Hess, who's the CEO of an interesting company in the US called Consensus. And he talks about basically getting stuff done. That's the objective. Everything else can get out of the way. It's getting stuff done. Leader or manager, both of them actually responsible for getting stuff done.
Absolutely. And I think what you just said about getting, and I don't know if you've seen this Venn diagram that Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn, used to talk about. He had this, because you mentioned getting stuff done. He had an intersecting Venn diagram of people he likes to work with. And it's basically people who think big, get stuff done, and have fun. And I think that's the intersection of what essentially as a leader you're trying to motivate people towards, but you need to, that getting stuff done is the job of every manager. And like you said, there's sometimes things can sound quite basic, but one very simple approach I use, and I know a lot of people have, like, this is my playbook of how to use me as a manager, because it's the manual of me when someone joins my team. But to me, there's really three buckets to it, which is process. I talk about process leadership being important. Just literally what is our deliverables, what are our tasks. We do literally a work planning session every Monday. So there are elements of my week which look then similar, and then my team knows that this is how we will operate and communicate internally, but also externally. So you have like a work plan, you align on things and so on. Second is, to me, purpose. And purpose is this is where the leadership element feeds into management as well, because you might have had a leader show something big, and there's a very big vision for the team. What does it mean for me in my role? Like you mentioned, if I'm in RevOps, if there's someone else who's a solutions engineer, what do I need to do in service to that bigger goal? So therefore, building that purpose, and I use that for any core projects that are going on, having check-ins around that, and how do you really drive towards. And the last one to me is all about people, and that's foundational, right? Because again, being a manager, having the ability to drive people and having the ability to motivate people, not just from being an inspirational leader, but really understanding what's going on in their lives, where their aspirations are both short term, near term, long term. Sometimes the aspiration might not even be in the role that they're in, might be in a different company. But as a manager, do you then wear the hat of the employee you're working with, and how do you really drive their success is in that bucket. So that's the three buckets, and I go through those in more detail with them.
Well, let's go through them in a little bit more detail just now. Just break it down just one level down, okay? So
Yes,
process, purpose, and people, your three Ps.
three P's. There you go.
Very cleverly done there.
You've caught on there, Paul.
That's the stuff. See, you can't pay anything past me, right? So
There you
process,
go.
deliverables and tasks, work planning. Like give somebody who's new to this
Yes.
some pointers about how you go about do that. You said you do a weekly stand up.
hmm So I would do, I tend to do this both within my team as a manager, but I also then try and extend this to the broader teams that I'm working with as well. But literally, to me, getting that Monday, it could, depending on the size of the team, half an hour, 1 hour, where you're really covering three things. Number one, um, it's it's more of a connect and a check-in point for everyone to come together as a team. It's important to build that rigor and process. But on what are our most important and urgent um, tasks for the week and even for the month ahead, which are all in service to a broader plan which you've already built, right? So there's been a this weekly cadence is almost like a check-in point to a broader plan or quarterly vision that you already have. But using that, that's one. Second, you almost I would say we live in a world where there are often meetings that we work towards or core decision points that we're literally building towards. What are the key activities and events coming up this week and next week? Just having that one shared view. What that also helps us get a conversation is, oh, you know what? Oh, Paul, I'm working on the same piece that you're working on, but in a different lens. Let's try and combine forces. So just having all of that in one place, it's really great to get collaboration where needed, help where needed, and that's one piece. And the third part to me, I actually call this virtual pets, and it's a part where again goes back to everybody is a person and has different aspirations which drive them. I literally do a again this is the consultant in me coming out. I have actually three metrics everybody has on what they want. For example, for me, the three metrics are I want to uh, sleep for a certain number of hours a day, exercise for a certain number of hours, and again these are specified metrics with number of hours per week. And I plan to have dinner X number of times at home with family. So those are things which and somebody could have like someone on my team running a marathon or somebody else has I want to learn the piano. So you really drive towards their aspirational goals and really have that moment of personal connection, but also then make space for it so you understand why somebody is doing a certain thing in the week.
So you're almost helping people to hold themselves accountable for their personal goals
Yes, in a
in a
way,
business environment.
in a way.
How does that
Giving
work?
them giving them room to do that because and again to me and I mentioned and I didn't go into the people side to me a large part of working and I you might have read there's this great book which talks about how people like uh, Google in the past and a few others have really built that space for teams to really build an almost a safe space where you're really encouraging each other to do great things and a large part of that comes from having the ability to be yourself. And to me, that's a very, very important personal value I hold, belonging. And I think it helps the team know each other, belong. And yes, you're holding yourself personally accountable, but it's not in a nitpicky way. It's more like, oh yeah, I need to make space to do that. Yeah.
Interesting. That's really nice. You're making public space for people's personal goals and helping them to the interesting bit is helping them to stay accountable to it.
Mhm. And that's why and it goes into process because it's in the same meeting where we're talking about our professional goals for the week,
Mhm.
talking about our personal goals. It's great.
And does it work?
It does. It does. In fact, I've been using this for a long time, and again, I won't claim this was my own brainchild because again, Bain did this really well. We had the concept of virtual baby over there when I brought a version of it over. One of my teammates was very very scared of talking about babies, so we made it virtual pets. But I've seen it work really well. There's a past teammate of mine in the previous role. He actually learned Spanish. He held he had that as a goal. He had not been as successful making time for it before this happened, but he did this for 6 months. He learned Spanish. He had like, I have to do Duolingo for X number of hours every week. I myself have been a lot more, I would say, a lot more real towards my goals because I'm like, okay, now I'm putting a metric towards it, similar to the way you think of a work goal.
Is that, I mean, I can see that working in a RevOps team
Mm.
where you are, by definition, a data-driven bunch of chaps and
That is
chapesses.
fine.
Basically, you're all geeks, right?
That is fair.
Nerdy, geeky
That is
types who like
that is
Excel.
very fair assessment.
That's a fair assessment, isn't it? It totally is. How's that going to work with the other sides of your organization? Well, I mean, mind you, management consultants, I suppose, they're kind of softly as well, aren't they?
To fair, again, the ones I work with all even more data driven than some of the folks I met in RevOps. So I think you're right. There's probably an element of who I've tried this out with. But when and if I do lead a non-data driven team, I do plan to try this out. So I'll let you know how that goes then, Paul.
It's fantastic. One of the companies I'm working with just now, very, it's full of creative
Mm-hmm.
people. I'm just wondering if that would actually fit for them. Interesting thought. That's fabulous.
Right.
Shintanu. Wow. Okay. All right. So that's your how-to advice then.
Mm-hmm.
Virtual pets. Wow.
Love it.
Okay. Was there a particular event or maybe a mistake or something that you learned most from?
And so I think, have you read the book Radical Candor by any chance, Paul?
Yes.
And one of the things I loved about Radical Candor talks about how in a role as a manager, it's important to care personally, but also challenge directly. And I think the one of the toughest parts of being a manager is having to do tough conversations. That's pretty much, I think, core to the job. A successful manager needs to have tough conversations. And I had seen early on in my career, I'd seen some really tough instances, and probably the toughest conversation a manager has to have is to let someone go. It's timely given the environment we're in these days in tech especially. But before I had to make the decision myself and go through that, I closely saw a peer of mine go through that process, and she had to unfortunately let someone go on the team. And then it was her first time as well when I'd seen this happen. And it wasn't the most the person who was laid off was surprised. Um, they didn't they didn't expect it. They probably had an inkling of something being off, but the way that entire process went, and obviously it just left a very, very strong, overpowering impression on the broader team. And this is like ages ago. So I learned from that. I've unfortunately had to do this more than a couple of times myself. Um, because sometimes, and this is I'm going to use another. I love how I keep quoting Jeff Weiner in any interview, but Jeff Weiner used to have this phrase. It's a very American phrase where in baseball, quite often you have a pitcher who can keep pitching for the entire match, but there's a time when you need to know when you have to take the pitcher out because the pitcher is tired, but the pitcher never wants to stop pitching. So that's the example he brings in and says sometimes the person might be in the wrong role, which is not right for them, and so on. So having that mindset of just knowing, okay, you know what, if you are making that decision, it has to be right for the person you're making the decision for, but also second, that person can never be surprised. That's the learning I took away. If I have to ever let anyone go, it should not come as a surprise. And in fact, the three people I'm thinking of in the last of those three people I've had to have those direct conversations with. One of them I'm actually still in regular touch with. The other two are not as regular. They're in different geography altogether. But all of them, literally, the conversation to let people go. We had a half an hour long chat and then went for a drink afterward. So it's just something which I've taken away, and I think it's the least we can, because that is the toughest decision. But it is the toughest decision for the person who's being impacted. The more the more it is number one, if I just leave one thing with anyone, and that's something I've taken away after that when I'd seen what happened, was it should not be a surprise.
No, no, no. I mean, I deliver 2 sections in my new manager course. One on difficult conversations, which builds on giving feedback. So basically, a difficult conversation is a carefully planned feedback session. Because if the feedback hasn't worked, you have to first of all look at yourself. You, as a manager, have not been clear enough. That's the first place to look. It's not, oh, they're not doing what I've asked. No, it's most likely to be you being a bit crap, frankly.
Yes.
And especially in a virtual environment where it's really difficult to give feedback or even to set expectations. You have to be really good. And then on, I call it firing with compassion. Right? And you don't mess about. You don't dance around. You don't say, oh, I have to let you go. I have to, we have to reconsider. We're down, right size, upsize, screw you, basically, get out the door. That's what they're hearing. So you might as well just use the words, I've decided to, not we are considering your, shut up.
It's you.
I have decided to fire you. Today will be your last day. Right? Own it,
I agree.
Do it, or don't do it. Oh no, and by the way, don't say, I'm really sorry to have to do this. I know how you feel. You're really valued here. You're not really sorry. That's why you're doing it. You don't know how they feel because it's the worst thing that could happen to them professionally. Right? Oh, I heard somebody once. I was sitting next to an HR person. Yeah. And they said, what was it? Something like, oh, I know this hurts just now, but it'll be the best. You'll realize it could be the best thing that's ever happened.
Oh, no.
What's up? Now, as it happens, it might well be the best thing that's ever happened to them, but at that moment in time, they want to take your eyes out with a spoon.
That is fair. And that's why it's so important. I love what you said about it, feedback, and I think that's probably the most important thing to always provide early and often, whether it's positive or constructive, either ways, right? And I think that's something which I think is something I take away from what I again saw in that one experience. And again, I know it is always a tough conversation to have, but the moment you can have that, and I go back to the process element of it, you have scheduled check-ins on a weekly basis. On a Friday, make room for 10 minutes for you to give feedback, for you to ask for feedback. On a monthly basis, talk about longer term career, how you're doing. So like literally, and that's where the process element of my people process and purpose comes in, is like literally there are things that you can schedule for. So there are no surprises across the board. Very important.
Yeah. I mean, for the whole one-to-one thing, which is really the only lever you have to move your business forward is your one-to-one with your individuals. So you have a repeating agenda, same damn thing every time, and you have a shared document that you work on. Right? So CUFCP is the thing I use. CUFCP, right? Check in.
CUFCP.
Right? So you check in. Updates on anything that's going on. Feedback, if you've got any. CUFC is for coaching, and then P is for planning. And you plan and you take the ownership forward. Coaching, check-in, update, feedback, coaching, planning.
I love this. I'm actually going to use this, Paul.
So simple.
I love it. I love this. It's great. I have my own one of my best. It's not an acronym. I'm loving this. As you see, I have a fondness for acronyms and frameworks. I think this is very, very directly applicable. So yeah, this is great.
You got MFA as well, which is a great one. You heard of that one? MFA? My favorite acronym.
I didn't know that one.
Or NEFA. There's not another flaming acronym.
Oh my goodness, yes.
No more flaming acronyms. Yeah.
No more.
Management consultants. Oh, that's what it is. That's what it is. Yeah. All right. What are you working on at the moment?
So a couple of things. So, and again, I don't know if and I know that you're one of the most listened podcasts in the UK. So, for the benefit of your listeners, what Gong does is basically a B2B SaaS company, but our product helps customers who are in a customer-facing role unlock the reality behind their customer-facing conversations, right? So it's basically using, let's say if this call was being recorded, let's say this was a sales call, you could actually go back in and get insights, which would be AI driven. You could use it for understanding the possibility of this deal closing. You could use it for, let's say, if I was a salesperson, my manager could coach me on how to how to be a better salesperson and find nuggets there. That's a very basic definition, but there's a lot more. We expand that to forecasting on a revenue intelligence side. We're even going towards prospecting. So a lot basically on the B2B SaaS side. So in a nutshell, my product is my job because revenue intelligence is what I've been doing for the better part of a decade now, and even maybe beyond that when I was a consultant. And really, I'm working on right now, if I think about, and it goes back to having those OKRs and coming back to the priorities, rather than going into a big thing for everything. The three big things for me this year, even if I think about, number one, and it feeds back into what we're thinking of as a company as well. We are moving towards being that big revenue intelligence platform. And for me, it starts with a new product that we're launching, which is going to be on the prospecting side. So that's something which we're going to call Engage. It's an engaging name, I hope.
Mhm.
And that's something I'm really excited about. Second, to me, mapping back to my role, but how can I, in my role, help us really go in and engage more with customers? As you rightly said, Paul, the traditional revenue operations professional is someone who's happy being behind a laptop, churning out data insights and making massive impact. Uh, I'm lucky to be in this role where our customers are actually people like me. So how can I communicate with them and help us really build that? So that's something I'm trying to do. In fact, I'm hosting a dinner later this week where we're kicking off with a small RevOps community for us in London. Um, and then the third big piece is, and obviously this is a year where um, across the not I mean we're obviously I'm talking from a very B2B SaaS tech mindset. The last 6 months have been a bit of a turmoil, to say the least, in the macro environment for us. So trying to make sure we are set up from a operational sense. We are building. We're still a very young company. We're building. We're actually expanding. We set up our European offices only a year and a half ago. So how do we continue to expand within is something while keeping an eye on the macro. What does it mean for us, and what does it mean for us from a people perspective? And get the same three buckets. But if I just think about that in terms of more really operational, what are the systems and processes we need to build here, and how do we continue that international expansion? It's going to be big.
It's enough to keep you busy.
Enough to keep us busy. Yeah, for sure.
Gong's a fabulous product. I mean, it's an absolutely superb product. I've used it with a number of different clients. It's quite intense what you can get out of it. So
Appreciate that, Paul.
what then are you reading or listening to at the moment that you would like to share?
Great. So I think, and again, I referred the book. I thought would be so. I tend to read more. I read two very competing genres. So I read, like most of us. I love reading business books to just be a better manager, be a better professional in my job. And three which really jump out to me there are the Culture Code. If you've heard that one, that's the one I taken the example of earlier. And as well, I really like how the examples that they've brought in and how they can connect to how you can succeed and learn from companies who've been successful. These are three things they did really well. So that's one. Second, I've really been focusing on being a um, better communicator as well, in terms of, like I said, to me, 80% of the job is communication and 20% is the actual art of it. And to that, I really liked starting with why, or start with why rather, I think. And that to me, again, and I love these books which have these examples that you can bring in and connect. And the third one I'm actually reading right now is more on the execution side. It's called Amp It Up. It's by the current CEO of Snowflake, Frank Slootman, and it talks about his journey, but also how he's been a, I don't want to use the term serial CEO, but he was the CEO at ServiceNow, made them big. He was the CEO at Data Domain, made them big. So and now he's at Snowflake. He was there before their IPO, and a big part of his story, he was this kid from Amsterdam or somewhere in the Netherlands who moved to the US, and really went in and drove a culture of driving impact and execution. So just trying to learn how they do it. So that's my main genre, let's say. But then the second side, I do dabble in the, if I call it, the Lord of the Rings genre, which is more on the fantasy side. So yeah, so in that, I don't know if I've been reading the Name of the Wind series. It's an interesting uh, it's an interesting mix of, I think it's Lord of the Rings meets Harry Potter meets Game of Thrones. That's what I'd call that.
Name of the Wind.
Name of the Wind.
Name of the Wind. Love it. Name of the Wind. I'm writing that down. I'm always looking for new things to read. I just finished reading The Hobbit to my kids.
Love it.
It's great fun. Absolutely great fun. The terrors of the forest of Mirkwood.
Oh, yes.
And of course, because it's my kids, I get to do all the voices, you see.
That is amazing. I can so imagine you're doing a great job in that.
I'm sure. I'll take it as a compliment.
It is meant to be one.
Oh, cracking. What would you like to thank the young Shantanu for doing?
I think I'd say two things. Really, number one, I think, as you can tell, I'm from India, and I think I grew up. My dad was in the Indian Army, so we moved around a lot in India. So that got in me an interest in just traveling. In fact, Dublin is the longest I've been in one place. I've never been for such a long time in one city. So in my younger days, I traveled a lot. So I obviously I'm from India, studied there. Then I started working in Singapore. Then whenever I got a chance to move, I would be the one to put my hand up. Oh, there's a project in Kenya. I actually did a project in Kenya. I lived in Africa for a while. I did 6 months in San Francisco, which is actually what got me interested in tech. So there's like literally I think what I'd really thank my younger self was for being open to trying out new geographies and exposures. And finally, that's what got me to Europe as well, much before I was 30. So I think that piece around being able to understand different cultures, being able to adapt your message to the right audience, because there is a reason behind the reason why everybody in different geographies, cultures, backgrounds might react differently to the same statistic or fact. It's something you have to learn and adapt to. So I think I really thank myself for that. And the second one is I've probably mentioned Bain like 10 times in this interview. I think when I was making that decision as a youngster, there were a few friends who were like, management consulting, are you sure you want to go in? And back then we used to work 80-hour work weeks.
Sell your soul.
It's exactly. Are you ready to sell your soul for and again at that point your first job after college or after B school is like your job for life, right? That's such a big decision. And to me it was like, I know it's going to be tough, but I think the toolkit I learned will be helpful in the future. And I really cannot thank my younger self enough for going through those tough few years of really working hard, because there are things which I really valued, the toolkit that I picked up there.
Outstanding. And lastly, as we wrap up, how can people find you? What are your coordinates? So
I think the best thing for me, again, the other name which I used as much as Bain today probably was LinkedIn, and I'm quite active on LinkedIn. It's my URL is the way my name is spelled, and yeah, I'm quite active there. So LinkedIn is the best place to connect to me. Well, we'll put your LinkedIn connections in the description of this episode. Shantanu Shekhar, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Thank you, Paul. Absolute pleasure to be here. That's a wrap. Thank you for joining me today. Your homework is to leave your 5-star review, and please, any comments you have, you really help me to improve every day, and it also helps people to discover me online. You should check out practical-leadership.academy because you want to help your new managers succeed with hybrid or remote working.